How's it going? My name is Mir and welcome back to Photo Mode Perspective. There's a lot to get through here, so let's just go ahead and get started. After you get Scapes unlocked, let's go ahead and head inside. Now once you're inside of Scapes, there's more than enough scenes to choose from. Saying here we have 2,500 spots. I'm just gonna pick a favorite, which is Akihabara. Now once you pick your scene, what you're going to be greeted with is your car placement. So go ahead and pick a car. I'm going to go with the new Z. And I believe, yeah, you can put up to 3. So let's do all Japanese cars. We'll do one more. Let's do, because you see this on the road all the time. There you go. Perfect. So once you have your car placed, go ahead and choose which car you want to focus on first. I'm going to go with the Z. And the first setting you see is your travel speed. Do you want to enable panning shots? Yes. So this is basically, do you want to enable a moving vehicle? You can have the static shot here, or you can adjust the speed of the vehicle so you get some sort of motion blur. And seeing that all these 3 cars are in the straight, I'm going to do that with all of them. So the Z, the GTR, and the Supra. All right, all of them are good to go. And let's see, let's give them a modest speed, nothing too crazy. We'll just go, just give them something light. Perfect. And you can adjust each single vehicle too. So we'll get all of them at 85. So after you set your travel speed, you can adjust the front wheel per vehicle too. So what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and adjust this one to the left a little bit. That should be fine. The Z I'm going to leave, and the GTR I'm going to leave. We're going to turn on the high beams on all of these cars. Oh, maybe it's a little too bright. Let's put the low view on. There we go. Brake lights. I think the only one that needs that is the GTR. As you can tell, it's about to hit a pedestrian vehicle. So turn signals, you can turn on the left one or the right one, or you can turn on both through the hazard lights. In my personal experience, apparently turn signals don't exist in the real world, so I'm gonna leave those off. Kind of simulate the real world, If you go into detailed settings, you can add dust to vehicles, oil stains, and all that. I'm just going to leave all of that off. That's up to you. That's personal preference. There's no need for me to dig deep into that, but if you want it there, it's there. So you can turn on or off the key light per vehicle. Again, personal preference. And there's also position lights. There's a bunch of different ones. Again, personal preference. And the same applies if you want to add a driver to the vehicle or add raindrops. Personal preference, that's totally up to you. And it looks like there is an option that's grayed out for me right now, but moving wings. So any sort of vehicle that has a movable wing, looks like you'd be able to adjust it here as well. Now once you have your car, or in this case cars, placed, let's head on over to the camera tab, which, this is where we're gonna have a lot of fun. So before we mess with any of the settings, your left stick, if you move it in or out, this is your zoom. This back here is your wide angle, as notated by the slider to your left. And then going this way, this is your telephoto, as notated by the T on the slider. So I think here I'm gonna do, let's do maybe like 60. I think 60 would be good. Yeah, so 60 millimeters. I like this one. If I go a little too far, it doesn't capture the environment, and I kind of want a little bit. I want a mix of both, the environment and the telephoto compression. The biggest thing to take away from these Scapes is these scenes, think of them as like a box. You're standing at the edge of a box and you can only pivot just a little bit. So for example, if I move the right stick, this is all I have left to work with. If I zoom in, I can move, a lot more. If I zoom out, I'm not moving much at all. So that's kind of like the downside to these scapes, is that you're kind of like in a box and you only pivot around. Each scape is going to be different too. So when you're zooming in and out in each scape, just take a notice of how much focal range you have. So here we have 34 millimeters all the way to 126 millimeters. That could be different scape by scape. So just keep that in mind when you're picking something. You may not have a lot of focal range to work with. So one thing I do really like about the camera here is if I zoom in and I roll the image, if I go towards the center, it actually sticks to the center once I get there. And I like that. It just levels the picture right when I need it. And then if I want to roll the other way, I can. So we're going to keep it leveled. We're going to zoom back out to 60 millimeters. Let's go ahead and frame this. And of course, you got your grid lines, which you can turn on down here, which is your rule of thirds. Once I have it framed up, I think the first thing I want to change is the aspect ratio. So 16:9 is going to be just your normal, widescreen. So if I hold down the touchpad, this will just take up your whole screen, right? What I like is this one. Gives it more of a movie-like feel. I like that a lot. Just ignore that little glitch at the bottom. But I like this a lot more, where you have like the crop bars at the top and bottom. This feels like I'm watching a movie. Let's see, before we change our aperture, let's check out the focus. So you have full auto, single autofocus, and lock-on autofocus. My favorite one is the lock-on autofocus, but before we get to that, full auto, it looks like, let's see, so it's definitely got the Z in focus, but we'll look at the other cars in focus. I guess not. All right. Where is it going to focus though? It looks like it just stays on one car. So full auto doesn't really give you a lot of control. Single autofocus. So this is what I use when it comes to taking pictures. So single autofocus, you can basically just do this thing called back button focusing, where you focus on one subject or one little area, and anytime your subject moves into that area, it'll always be in focus in that area. So for example, if I were to get this wheel in focus, right? If the car moves, where that wheel is sitting, it's going to stay focused in that little area. But I think the best one for scapes is lock-on autofocus. So let's say I want to keep the Z in focus. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit square and I'm going to keep the autofocus there. Now, if I go back to the car tab, if I move this car around, let's say I move this car over here, go back to camera, it's still locked on the Z. So that's why I like the lock-on autofocus. You can just stick it to one car or one part of a car and say, hey, I always want this in focus. You can adjust the car wherever you need it, go back, and it's still going to be in focus. Now, the nice thing is that we can actually take this picture and see how it's looking so far without actually saving the image. So we'll go ahead and hit triangle. Not bad. I like it so far. Now, in this preview, you can use this to take a look at it and be like, all right, what else can I adjust? I'm noticing that the back of the Supra and just the background in general is a little too bright for my taste. So I think I want to adjust that. The blur might be a little too blurry. I kind of want to change that a little bit. But aside from that, I like where this is heading. Let's go to shutter speed first. Now for the motion blur, I kind of want to stop down this shutter speed about one stop. So we'll go down to 1/25th, and that'll reduce the amount of motion blur. See, now it doesn't look as blurry. I think this looks a lot cleaner. Now, if you kept going with the shutter speed, like 1/8000th of a second, you're basically telling the camera like, hey, the shutter's got to open and close at 1/8000th of a second. So it's just maybe even faster than that. And it has no time to process any motion. So if you pick 1/8000, what it's going to do is create a freeze frame. It's basically just stopping all the motion, just saying like, hey, this is where everything is. Now, if you go the opposite direction, if we go to half a second, it's telling the camera to open and close the shutter right in front of the sensor at half a second. So and what this will do, it gives it more time to process motion. Now take a look. Oh, it won't let me do it. So what this confirmation is telling me is that, hey, the shutter speed's a little too slow. So slow, in fact, that your car already left the frame. So here's the camera, and the car already passed it. And then the game's telling you like, hey, it's already past the frame. Pick a different shutter speed. Yikes. Hey, if you want to go for this look, you can. I think I'm going to stick with 1/125th. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So now let's do the aperture. Now look at the little icon for aperture. What that's indicating is blades inside of an actual lens that open and close. When it's at something like f16, that means the blades are closing up. And when the blades end up closing, that means less light going into the camera, but also you have a wider depth of field. You have more in focus. Now, if you go the opposite direction, go to f1.4, what it's doing is opening up those blades, and you're creating a shallower depth of field, meaning you create more bokeh and blur in the background. One thing I really like about Gran Turismo 7's photo mode is if you go past f16, because this will happen in real cameras. Ideally, when you're stopping down your aperture, if you're closing the blades, it should look sharper with more in focus, right? You go a little too far, and it'll soften up your image. And this is what's known as diffraction. So with aperture, keep in mind, usually lenses f5.6 to f11, 16, somewhere around there is like the prime shooting spot when it comes to lenses. That's where you get the maximum amount of like pinpoint focus. So what we're gonna do, let's do f11, because I do want the background to show in this image. All right, next you have your exposure correction or your exposure compensation. This is basically how many stops over and how many stops under exposed do you want it. Well, if we go further up, one stop overexposed, then look what's happening. You have the background brightening up, you have the middle brightening up, and so on. It's basically brightening the image. Now if we go the opposite direction, now we're underexposing. Now if we keep underexposing, what I really like is take a look at these signs in the background. When you underexpose or when you bring down your highlights, what ends up happening is that the bright spots, you get more details in the bright spots. So those signs are a prime example. If you go 3 stops underexposed, now you have more detail in the signage in the back. I think what I'm gonna do is probably darken it just a little bit, maybe about a stop and a half, just to get some more detail in the back. Now, if you turn on the travel speed in the car tab, when you come over to the camera tab, you have more options when it comes to the panning shot. Here you have the camera tracking ratio, and this is basically saying like how much the camera is actually locked onto the car. So are you just like 1-to-1, like, all right, here's the car going by, all right, like that? Or is it kind of delayed? Like, all right, it's kind of going by and you're kind of following it. That's up to you. So let's look at a couple examples. So if we go at 100% and we shoot the car, the Z is pinpoint focused, and it's basically someone standing on the street panning with the Z. It's just following it, 1-to-1. Now, if we go the opposite direction, let's say let's go 0%. Let's see what happens. Kind of like a shakier camera. You're not really following it as closely. So depending on what kind of image you want, you can adjust how locked on you are to the car with the camera. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep it kind of high because I want, let's say 95%. Because I want everything, I want the motion blur to look clean. So I want whoever's tracking the car to track it basically 1-to-1. Of course, you have your aspect ratio we've already looked at. You can do a portrait image or a landscape image. And then of course, if you do portrait, make sure you change your aspect ratio. I'm going to keep it landscape because I do like this wide look. All right, next we'll move on to the effects tab, and oof, there's a lot in here. So first, let's start off with the color temperature. Color temperature is going to be marked by a K or Kelvin. And usually when it comes to, like, let's say white or like daytime, around 5600 Kelvin is kind of like your neutral white. Now, if you go in the opposite directions, you have 3000 Kelvin and 12,000 Kelvin. 3000 Kelvin, this is your blues. This makes the image colder. And if you go the opposite direction, this will be your oranges, and this will make your image warmer. Now, if you notice that your image is a little, too warm, too cold, you can adjust it in the white balance setting here. So I usually just go to 5600 and just kind of adjust it from there. Now, if you're taking a picture in an actual camera and you're taking the picture in a RAW format, it doesn't matter what white balance you set it, you can adjust it in post-processing. So in Lightroom or Capture One, whatever you use, you can adjust your color temperature after the fact. So set it however you like. Next is going to be your color cast correction or your tint. So here, this is your green and your magentas. So if we go all the way to the 0.5, this adjusts your green in your image, and magenta will be on the opposite end. So this will be more so like, let's say if I go right there smack dab in the middle, I'm looking at this image right now and I'm seeing, I don't know, there's a little bit too much green in here, like the background, it just doesn't look too pleasing to me. So I'm going to adjust it. So I'm going to nudge the tint over to the magenta side. That way the green that's in the back, it kind of brightens up and it doesn't look as washed out, doesn't look as disgusting to the eye. You want to be subtle with these. So just like that, I think that looks a lot cleaner. So I think the colors look pretty good here. I like where my temperature is. I like where my tint is. The exposure correction, I'm going to leave it here for now. I might adjust it, but I'll leave it at negative 1.5. We're going to go down. We're going to skip the presets. If you want a preset, that's fine. You can go for it, but we're going to go down to the special effects. Film grain, that is a personal preference. If you want a clean image, or if you want an image, if you're taking a image of a vintage vehicle, you may want to add some grain to kind of give it that vintage look. But film grain, personal preference, that's up to you. You can choose whether or not it's a monochrome film grain or a color film grain. Again, personal preference. So you have your vignette strength. So if I bring this up further, it's basically just making me focus right at the center of the screen. And your vignette radius, if I increase this, it basically just kind of spreads it out a little bit. Maybe do a 20, and that's it. Nothing crazy. So lens distortion. So lens distortion isn't really an issue anymore. A lot of the time with like modern lenses, like let's say something like this, you take an image with this and you go to edit it, it's automatically going to fix the distortion. But if you shoot with like an older, like a vintage lens, it may still have that distortion and you'd have to adjust it if you want to. Here, if you want to adjust the distortion, you can. So here's just a flat image, but if you wanted to distort it to give it like a vintage lens look, you can go for that. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the distortion off. So color fringing, this is basically your chromatic aberration. Now, if we turn it on, go all the way to the extreme, take a look at the edges. This kind of gives you more of a vintage lens look, or more of like a cyberpunk-ish look. And it looks like it goes in opposite directions, so it gives you two different types of chromatic aberration looks. Yeah, so adjust it how you want it. Again, not really an issue with modern lenses. And there's usually some sort of like checkbox in Lightroom saying like, hey, remove the chromatic aberration. So I'm going to leave it off. Glare, this will also be like your bloom setting. It's basically for the lights, for the highlights. If I turn it up, it'll just make these highlights just pop a lot more. I'm gonna keep it at a tame level, maybe increase it just a little bit, maybe something like that. All right, and then now you have your screen effects. So you have 3 of them to work with, and then a car effect you can apply to the car itself. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go straight to the first one, and we're gonna apply a mask. Now in this mask, you can actually choose. If I choose this one, it's going to affect everything but the car. So for example, if I go in here and I change the filter is affecting everything but the car. I go back, change the mask. Let's do, so anything that's in white is going to get affected. So let's do the bottom half of the image filter. So like, let's say if I do lo-fi here, it'll brighten up the entire bottom half of the image. So let's say I pick that, and then it's going to ask you for the degree of application. So just how much do you want? So let's do like 50-ish%. That should be all right. Kind of liking where this is heading. And now you can actually apply 2 more. So let's do this. Let's apply another mask. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply 1 to the top and bottom. And we're not going to add a filter to it. Instead, we're going to adjust the individual color tone correction. Now, once you go in here, it's like I'm actually editing in Lightroom. This is crazy. Once you go in here, you can adjust a bunch of different parameters. So you can adjust your saturation. So if you look at the top and the bottom of this image, if we put this all the way down to 0, now look, the colors are all desaturated. Bring this back. Go the opposite direction. Now the colors are all saturated at the top and bottom. So you can really fine tune what you want in the image, and then the mask will just tell you where. Brightness, we're actually going to bring this down a little bit because I want more focus on the car. So we're going to bring this down and basically create our own vignette. Now you can also adjust the RGB range. So if you wanted to, like, let's say the brightness, like, let's look at the top of that image. We're in the brightness parameter. Let's go to RGB. Let's go to red. We increase it. Now look, top and bottom is red. Let's maybe add a little green. Let's take away some of the blues. So you can really fine tune the color editing here. I think I'm going to keep everything as it is, but you can do the same thing with your contrast and your highlight. You can adjust the RGB range. So if you want more red in that area, so if you want more red in the highlights, it's very subtle, but there's more red at the top. You can do that. Let's say we want to do more blue in the highlights. Again, very subtle, but you can do that as well. So let's say we keep it on that blue, right? We go back and we change the mask. Let's say the entire top half of the image. There you go. Now the entire top half of the image is blue. So if there's something in one of the scapes that you don't like, man, I wish I could change the color, apply a mask to where you want that change, and then adjust the individual tone. Let's see, we'll leave the third mask off, and we're gonna jump straight to the car effect. So this will only affect the car itself. So you can adjust, it looks like it adjusts the car and the light surrounding it. I'm gonna leave that off, but I do want to change this. Brightness, let's increase it just a little bit. Let's do like 300. I think that'll be all right. This is usually how editing images go. You just go slider to slider and just like, all right, let's go to each extreme. And then once you see something change, then you adjust it. I think because this image is kind of dark, there's a lot of shadows and highlights and not so much midpoints. It's not really adjusting much. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it here. Your black correction, if we increase this, it'll basically desaturate your blacks. If you go the opposite direction, this will increase the blacks. Now you can use this as like a makeshift contrast. So if we bring down the value just a little bit, it adds more contrast between the highlights and the shadows. I do want to increase the contrast just a little bit. Subtlety is key here. We're going to increase the brightness a little more to compensate for that contrast. We're gonna leave, let's do this. Let's actually bring down this because I think it's going a little too hard with the adjustments. So we'll do like 75. That should be fine. I think everything else looks good. Now there's quite a bit that we did here. Now let's see how this actually looks. So hit triangle, take the image. That's looking pretty good. I think what I want to do is maybe increase the brightness of the street underneath the Z. So I think we'll do that. We're gonna add this mask, and we'll do this corner. Yeah, let's do that. And we're going to adjust the correction, and we're going to brighten it just a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and retake the image. There you go. Yeah, I'm happy how this one came out. The motion blur is subtle, but it's there. The colors feel a lot more natural. It doesn't look too in your face. A lot of the greens in the backgrounds, like in the signs and like the lights and so on, are gone. So it feels a lot more pleasing to the eye. There's a lot of contrast on the car itself, so it really pops out. And then the car itself, the Z, is in focus too, so you can definitely tell there's two other cars there, but the Z is like the main headliner here. What do you think of this image? You like it? So aside from Scapes, there's actually another way to take pictures of your vehicles, and that is through the replay feature after a race. So I'm gonna jump into this race real quick. Let's see, we got a bunch of slow cars. Let's go ahead and annihilate them. We're gonna change it up a bit. We're gonna go with ZL1. This shouldn't take long. Oh my god, just like real American highways. There's always a Prius in the way. Get out of my way, Jesus. Easy. Now after your race, you're gonna get a replay. And when you get into your replay, go ahead and hit this camera icon. We're gonna wait until I hit this Prius. Yep, right there. So once you hit that camera icon, you have different cameras you can go through. Bunch of different angles you can work with. You can even get an interior shot, which, man, that looks amazing. But what I want to go to is this right here, the walk mode. So this is more or less your traditional photo mode like in other games. So you can walk around and select the angle at which you want to shoot. Once you find an angle you like, go ahead and hit X, and this is going to create an escape. Now everything's pretty standard affair, stuff that we just went through. So we'll go ahead and zoom in. Let's actually zoom in on this this Toyota Aqua. Here it's the Prius C. Something I just found out too. If you hold down square to focus, you can use the left analog stick to select your focus point. Before we go into any more of the camera settings, the effects tab is the exact same. So what we just learned, it's going to be the same here. The big difference in the camera tab is going to be this panning shot settings. Here you have 3 modes, panning modes. So it's basically mode 1 is the camera is staying still and you're just moving the camera as if the car is going by. Mode 2 is the camera and the car are moving at the same time. Mode 3 is the camera is rotating and so is the car. Now, all of these have slight differences, so you may want to play around with all these. So we'll go with mode 1 first, and we'll go ahead and hit shoot. So this is what mode 1 looks like. This is what mode 2 looks like. Now this is what mode 3 looks like. Imagine if you were standing on the side of a racetrack and you wanted to take pictures of these cars. How do you want to do it? Do you want to stand there and just take a picture as they're going by? Do you want to run alongside them? Do you want to rotate with them? That's basically what you're doing here. And depending on which mode you pick, it's going to adjust the motion blur accordingly. Oof, that was quite a bit to go through, but I'm hoping that everything I've explained you've understood and it helps you to take better pictures in Gran Turismo 7. If you want to see my real life car photography, head down below to Mir-or-Image, at Mir-or-Image on Instagram, and check out the pictures I've taken in the real world. And I think that's going to be it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time.